This lesson is over adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. So there's a procedure that you can go through and you can read through these steps to solve, but we're actually just going to work an example to demonstrate this. So we are dealing with fractions, adding and subtracting with integers this year, whereas last year you just dealt with positives. So you're always going to need to keep in mind your integer rules, but your very first concern is getting a common denominator. So between 3 and 9, your least common multiple is 9, which means the 3 is multiplied by 3 to make 9, and the 2 is multiplied by 3 to make 6. Remember that when you're adding and subtracting fractions, the denominator always stays the same because what you're adding is the parts, 4 parts and 6 parts of 9. So keep in mind that this is a negative, so -4 and +6 is +2. Always simplify your answers if necessary. So on the next one, again, we have positives and negatives, but our first concern is going to be to get the denominators the same. So between 8 and 6, my least common multiple is 24. You could use 48 if you want, but then you're just going to have some reducing to do at the end. So 8 times 3 is 24, and 1 times 3 is 24. Don't forget that that's negative. 6 becomes 24 by multiplying by 4, which means this is going to be 20. Now, because we have 19, the 19 is negative, we have more negatives and less positives. So what we're really going to end up doing is subtracting these two numbers because of our integer rules. So I'm going to write them vertically because there's going to be some borrowing involved. So in this case, I can't do 3 minus 20, so I'm going to have to borrow from my whole number and make this 18. When I cut it up, that means I get 24 additional pieces or parts to add to my 3. So this problem becomes 18, 27 over 24 minus 7 and 20 over 24. So 18 minus 7 is 11, and 27 minus 20 is 7. Always double check your remainder, your remaining fraction part to see if it reduces. 7 does not go evenly into 24, so we don't need to reduce. However, please remember that we started out with more negatives than positives, so you do need to have a negative answer. The next problem is calculating the difference. So the important part here is to remember to add the opposite. And now you just have two negatives which need to be added together. So first I'm going to find a common denominator by multiplying by 3. What we really have is -4/9 plus -4/9, which makes -8/9. On the next one, this problem, excuse me, I think is a typo. Let me double check. Nope. Okay, sorry. It's going to be 19 and 1/8. We found the common denominator of 24 before by multiplying by 3. And then because this is adding a negative, that's really saying we have more positives than negatives, which really means we need to subtract the two numbers to figure out what's left over. So this is made into a 24 by multiplying by 4. 5 times 4 is 20. So again, we're going to have to borrow here. So this is going to become 18, which adds 24 pieces to our 3 existing. So my borrowing is done, and now I can complete my subtraction, which is going to give me 11 and 7 over 24. However, this time, I started out with more positives than I did negatives, so my answer is just positive. So we're going to try a few more. The common denominator between these is 10. So I have 6 and 10 and 8, because I multiply both by 2. This is an add the opposite. which means we have more negatives than we do positives. So we need to subtract the two numbers to figure out how much is left. There's going to be 2 1/10. However, keep in mind you started with more negatives, so your answer should be negative. On the next one, we have more negatives than we do positives, so we are going to end up subtracting our numbers. Sorry, we have more positives than we do negatives. I think I said that backwards. But I have to find a common denominator first. So between 5 and 4, that's going to be a 20. So I'm going to multiply both top and bottom by 4. And this one's going to give me times 5, so that'll be 15 over 20. And luckily, I do not have to borrow on this one. So since there was more positives than negatives, my answer is going to be positive. On the next one, positives and negatives. I have more positives than negatives, so that lucks out for me. 21 is my common denominator, so that one does not need to change. However, this one needs to be multiplied by 3. 16 minus 8 is 8. 4 minus 3 is 1. More positives than negatives. My answer is positive. Please make sure you add the opposite on this next one. You've got negatives and negatives, which means really we're adding the two numbers together. I do need to find a common denominator, so this is going to be multiplied by 4. And this is already at 20. I'm adding the two numbers together, which is going to give me 21 and 17 over 20, except they were negative to begin with, so I have to make sure and put my negative on my answer. (24 minus 9 and 7/12). I have no fractional part on the top, so I'm going to have to borrow, make 23, which means I now have 12 pieces out of 12. So 12 minus 7 is 5. And then 23 minus 9 is 14. It's positive because I started out with positives and subtracted a smaller amount. You have to do parentheses first. So when you add the opposite, that should make sense that these are just going to be added together. I'm going to use 12 as my common denominator. You could use 24. You just might have to reduce at the end. So times 2 plus times 3. That's going to be negative 13 over 12. And then I have to add 1/2. 1/2 with the denominator of 12 is 6/12. Now I have negative 13 and positive 6. That's going to be negative 7/12. The last one says Catherine had 23 2/3 pounds of fertilizer left over from a 40-pound bag after fertilizing her yard. Her neighbor asked to borrow some, and he returned 6 1/5 pounds. How much fertilizer did her neighbor use on his yard? So she had this much left over from a 40-pound bag. Doesn't matter what size bag there was, this is how much she loaned to her neighbor. He only returned this amount, so we need to find out how much he used. We do that by taking 23 2/3 and subtracting 6 1/5, and that'll give us the remaining amount. However, I need common denominators, so this is going to be 23, and I'm going to use 15. So times 5 on top and bottom, and on this one times 3, top and bottom. 10 minus 3 is 7/15. 23 minus 6 is 17. So there were 17 7/15 pounds that her neighbor used. Please complete the assignment on the next couple of pages. Please make sure and show your work.